Today's story is both disturbing and confusing, one unlike any other, the mysterious disappearance of Laurent Baca. It all began on August 11th, 2014, when a visibly nervous and soft-spoken woman walked into a police station in Toulouse, France. Her name was Edith Scaravetti, a 27-year-old mother of three. She introduced herself as the wife of Laurent Baca, a 36-year-old man who, according to her, had been missing for 5 days. Edith explained that Laurent's disappearance was highly uncharacteristic. In the 10 years they had lived together, he had never vanished without a word. He was a father, a partner, and despite their occasional struggles, he was always present. The couple shared a modest home where they were raising their 3 children together. She recounted the morning of August 6th with eerie clarity. Like any other day, she woke the children and prepared them for daycare. There was no argument, nothing out of the ordinary. But when she returned home later that morning, Laurent was gone. Completely gone. Yet what made the situation even more bizarre was what wasn't missing. His car was still parked in the driveway. His clothes, wallet, phone, bank cards, and even his personal papers were all untouched. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving everything behind. No neighbors reported hearing anything unusual. No struggle, no shouting, no suspicious noises. There were no signs of forced entry, no blood, no broken glass, just silence. Edith assured the police that Laurent had no history of mental illness, no medical conditions that could cause disorientation or confusion. However, there was one thing she hesitated to admit at first. Laurent was a heavy drug user. Sometimes, she said, he even sold drugs to make ends meet. It was a dangerous world he occasionally dipped into, and Edith feared that disclosing this to the police would only drag his name and their family into deeper trouble. Eventually, under pressure and desperation, she offered a vague theory. Perhaps, she suggested, Laurent had taken a secret trip to Spain, possibly for a deal or some other hidden business arrangement. Maybe he hadn't told her to protect her. Maybe he'd be back soon. That, she explained, was why it took her 5 days before she reported his disappearance. She clung to the hope that he would return, walk through the door as if nothing had happened. But as each day passed in silence, the weight of worry grew too heavy to bear. Now, to the best of Edith's knowledge, Laurent had a troubled past. In 1999, he was convicted for the possession and sale of illegal drugs. The court handed down a 1-year prison sentence, followed by a probation period. That wasn't his only brush with the law. He also had a separate conviction for assault and battery, painting a picture of a man who had once walked a dark path. But things seemed to change after he married Edith. Together, they had 3 children, and with fatherhood came a visible transformation. Laurent appeared determined to leave his criminal history behind. He began volunteering at a local sports club, dedicating his time to coaching children, completely free of charge. To many who knew him, it seemed he had finally found purpose and redemption. When Laurent disappeared, Edith was hesitant to involve the authorities. However, armed with the information she reluctantly shared, the police launched a search. Their first step was to contact local morgues and hospitals, checking to see if anyone matching Laurent's description had been admitted, dead or alive. When that turned up nothing, they expanded their efforts, reaching out to nearby prisons and neighboring police departments, in case Laurent had been arrested or detained in a different jurisdiction. Despite their persistence and the sheer volume of calls made, there was no sign of Laurent anywhere. Then, on August 18th, with leads running cold, the police turned their attention to Laurent's family. His relatives had been deeply concerned from the start. In fact, they had urged Edith to report his disappearance much earlier, but she had been reluctant, trying, it seemed, to keep the entire situation hidden from public view. Laurent had always been deeply connected to his family, especially his mother, who spoke to him every single day without fail. Their bond was strong, and for someone as family-oriented as Laurent, his sudden disappearance was not only alarming, but completely out of character. He adored his children and would never willingly leave them behind, which made his absence even more troubling. However, those who knew Laurent well were also aware of his darker side. He had a notoriously short temper and was known to drink excessively. In those drunken moments, he would often say things better left unsaid, words that hinted at inner turmoil or unspoken frustrations. Before the authorities got involved, Laurent's family had already launched their own frantic search. For 10 straight days, they combed through every possible lead. They spoke to friends, questioned neighbors, and plastered missing person posters across the city of Toulouse. When that didn't bring results, they reached out to the local newspapers, hoping that an appeal printed on August 14th would prompt someone, anyone, with information to come forward. But the phone never rang, and no one stepped forward. Desperation began to take hold. In a last-ditch effort, the family even consulted a psychic, clinging to any sliver of hope, no matter how unconventional. Acting on the psychic's advice, they scoured the lakeside areas around Toulouse, hoping to find some trace of Laurent, but their efforts were in vain. His father took it upon himself to search all the nearby wells, using a special flashlight to peer deep into the darkness, refusing to give up. Laurent's sister extended the search beyond French borders, contacting embassies in Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands, fearing he might have run into trouble in one of those countries. Adding another layer to the tragedy was the couple's financial instability. According to Edith, Laurent's partner, they were barely scraping by. Laurent worked primarily as a laborer, bouncing from one short-term job to the next, never earning enough to provide true stability. Meanwhile, Edith was employed as a caretaker for the elderly, earning nothing more than minimum wage. Often she had to rely on her father just to pay the bills or afford essential appliances for their children. Even the roof over their heads wasn't truly theirs. It belonged to Edith's family. The house they lived in, while a place of shelter, symbolized the uncertainty that loomed over their everyday lives. The couple had been allowed to live in the house rent-free, a small mercy considering their dire financial situation. They owned no property, carried no loans or debts, had no savings, and lacked even the basic safety net of life insurance. Their survival hinged entirely on Laurent's occasional odd jobs and Edith's modest salary. The constant strain of living hand-to-mouth weighed heavily on Edith, and it was this struggle that led her to suspect that Laurent might have slipped back into his old habits, dealing drugs. A few days passed in unbearable silence, and Edith's worry escalated into panic. She could no longer bear the uncertainty or the gnawing fear that something terrible had happened to her husband. Desperate, she returned to the police station and, for the first time, confessed her concerns about Laurent's past involvement in drug trafficking. Along with her statement, she handed over an envelope she had discovered at home. Inside was a phone number, scribbled hastily on a torn scrap of paper. The police wasted no time. When they dialed the number, the voice on the other end was immediately familiar. It belonged to a man they had recently arrested on drug trafficking charges. This connection instantly shifted the direction of the investigation. The police began to formulate a theory. Perhaps Laurent had disappeared while on a drug run. To them, this was the most plausible explanation. However, Laurent's family rejected this idea outright. While they admitted he had a checkered past, they insisted that this behavior was out of character. Laurent once had a panic attack just for carrying a tiny amount of weed, a family member recalled. There's no way he'd ever have the nerve to make deals with major players, especially not across borders. The following day, police brought in Laurent's former accomplice for further questioning. To their surprise, the man was cooperative. He didn't hesitate to speak and seemed eager to distance himself from Laurent. Based on what he knew, he told officers that a cross-border drug deal was not only possible for Laurent, but probable. He revealed that despite Laurent's minimal income, he somehow managed to spend up to 800 euros a month on drugs like cannabis and cocaine. Now that the accomplice had made his statement, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. His words gave the investigators a clearer picture. Yet, there remained a crucial gap. Laurent's sudden disappearance still had no solid explanation. Where was he, and what exactly had happened? After a tense round of interrogation, the accomplice made a final, cryptic remark just before being escorted out of the room, one that would shift the entire foundation of the investigation. "I'm certain Laurent is dead," he said solemnly. Before he vanished, he asked me for a favor. He said, "I have a feeling Edith is cheating on me with a youth worker from our kids' daycare. Can you teach him a lesson?" The room fell silent. This single statement birthed a new theory, one that pointed in a very different direction. Now, the focus shifted to Edith's possible lover. Could he have killed or kidnapped Laurent in an act of desperation? The idea struck a chord with Laurent's family. Unlike the initial theories they had struggled to accept, this one felt disturbingly possible. In fact, 3 weeks prior to Laurent's disappearance during a family dinner, a strange incident had occurred. Edith's phone rang unexpectedly, and Laurent was the one who picked it up. No one else knew who was on the other end, but Laurent's reaction was unforgettable. His voice, sharp and furious, echoed across the dining room. "Stop calling," he barked. "You're going to ruin my marriage. You're messing everything up." Then, without another word, he hung up and slammed Edith's phone down on the table. The police wasted no time verifying the story. Phone records confirmed that, in the weeks leading up to Laurent's disappearance, Edith had made numerous calls to the daycare center. In fact, a shocking 800 calls and text messages had been exchanged between her and the man she was allegedly involved with, just within a span of 3 weeks. But before authorities could even begin tracking the man down, he walked into the station himself, nervous, pale, and clearly shaken. "I know you're going to suspect me," he said immediately, "but I had nothing to do with this." He denied having any serious romantic involvement with Edith. "Yes, we met when she dropped her children off at daycare," he admitted. "We talked often, maybe kissed once or twice, but I regretted it. I think she was just looking for someone to talk to, someone to listen. That's all our relationship was. We weren't lovers." He paused, then added, "The last time Edith and I spoke was on July 23rd. She texted me to say we couldn't talk anymore. Laurent was watching her closely. He had grown suspicious." The confession cast new shadows over an already complex case. Was Laurent's paranoia justified? Was Edith hiding more than she let on? Or was there someone else involved, someone even closer to the truth? The police began investigating Edith's lover's whereabouts on August 6th and 7th, just 5 days before Laurent's disappearance. The man, who had a regular day job, was also a volunteer firefighter. On both days, he had been on duty, providing an alibi that cleared him of any involvement in Laurent's case. However, as the investigation continued, the police began to question whether this was even a murder at all. Laurent had a 14-year-old son from a previous relationship who did not live with him and Edith. According to Edith, Laurent had developed a profound distrust after his previous relationship ended. She revealed that he had once even attempted suicide during that turbulent period. Perhaps, with the fear of his marriage falling apart and the possibility of Edith's infidelity, Laurent was pushed to the brink, driven to commit the unimaginable. To explore this theory, the police conducted thorough neighborhood inquiries, scoured vacant lots near the house, and even enlisted search dogs, suspecting that Laurent might have taken his own life and that his body might be close by. The investigation led them to contact Laurent's ex-wife. What she had to say about Laurent did not paint a favorable picture of his character. First, she confirmed that she had not heard from him, but that was not unusual. She recalled the violent arguments that had been a constant issue in their family life, with Laurent often being the instigator. It had reached a point where Laurent's son had disowned him, refusing to even see him. According to his ex-wife, Laurent was a violent man, known for physically abusing them. This raised a chilling possibility. Perhaps Laurent had continued this violent behavior toward Edith, which could explain her lack of emotional reaction to his disappearance. Police officers described Edith as discreet, almost excessively tight-lipped and distant regarding the case. She revealed very little about what she knew, keeping her thoughts to herself. Laurent's family echoed similar concerns, stating that Edith had become increasingly withdrawn and reclusive, rarely leaving the house. They also noted that she had no initial intention of involving the police in the search for her missing husband. It was only after being heavily pressured by Laurent's mother that Edith agreed to file a missing persons report. Yet, even before filing the report, Edith's actions had raised more suspicion. She had misled Laurent's family, telling them that Laurent was safe, staying at a friend's house, and later, a relative's house. When questioned further, she sometimes refused to answer and would try to change the subject or avoid family members altogether if they approached her in person. Even after the missing person report was filed, Edith did not participate in any of the search efforts. Her lack of involvement only deepened the police's concerns and suspicion. The case continued to unfold with more questions than answers, and Edith remained an enigma, as distant and uncooperative as ever. Edith's refusal to tell the police about her possible affair raised even more suspicion. The police were only able to uncover the truth through Laurent's accomplice and by analyzing her phone records. With her increasingly suspicious behavior and the troubling information provided by Laurent's ex-wife, the police felt it was time to dig deeper into their domestic life. If you're still watching, please give this video a like. Now, this is where the story takes an unexpected twist, leading to a shocking revelation. From the little the police had gathered about the couple and the impressions shared by the neighbors, they appeared to be the picture-perfect couple. Laurent was seen as the ideal husband and neighbor, always cheerful, friendly, and eager to make new connections. He was the type of person who always wore a smile and made others feel welcome. Edith, on the other hand, was regarded as the perfect mother, devoted to caring for her children and managing her home with apparent grace. However, this image was about to be shattered. The police, eager to verify what they had heard, brought Edith in for questioning to fact-check everything they had been told about her marriage. As previously mentioned, Edith worked as a caretaker for the elderly, earning only a minimum wage despite her full-time commitment. In addition to her job, she was responsible for the bulk of the housework and raising the couple's 3 children. After a long day at work, Edith would tend to the children, getting them ready for school, playing with them, helping them with their homework, before she would turn her attention to the household chores. But when it came to Laurent, the dynamic was different. According to Edith, Laurent didn't have a steady job. Instead, he did odd jobs, trying to save whatever money he could. Yet, despite not being employed full-time, he constantly demanded that Edith do all the work at home, treating her as though she were his personal servant. Edith described Laurent as a tyrant in daily life, who insisted that everything in the house be done to his exact specifications. His obsession with perfection left Edith working herself to the bone, trying to meet his unreasonable standards. While Edith was overwhelmed with her responsibilities, Laurent did little to help. Instead, he spent his time inviting friends over, knowing full well that he wouldn't be expected to clean up after them. This stark contrast in their roles painted a much different picture of their relationship, one far from the idyllic image that had been presented by neighbors. At the beginning of July, Edith finally stood her ground for the first time. She packed her bags and took the children to her father's house, just weeks before a scheduled vacation in Palavas, an escape that Laurent had insisted on, despite Edith's reluctance to go. According to Edith, Laurent secretly followed them to her father's house, but after realizing he didn't know how to win his family back, he returned home. Determined to salvage something, Laurent went to Palavas alone. However, his feet became mysteriously injured, rendering him unable to drive. This was likely a ploy to get Edith and the kids to join him, and when they finally arrived, Laurent made it clear that Edith needed to stay, if not for him, then at least to give their children a normal summer vacation. By early October, 2 months into the investigation, the police were now fully convinced that Laurent had been murdered. They continued questioning acquaintances, hoping to uncover more details. Eventually, one of Edith's co-workers came forward with a disturbing piece of information that strengthened their second theory. She revealed that she saw Edith every day during their shift changes, and on multiple occasions, she noticed that Edith's face was bruised and badly injured. At this point, the police knew Edith was hiding something, and they had no choice but to make her the prime suspect. Her alibi wasn't strong enough to clear her of involvement. To better understand Edith, the police conducted a background check on her. What they uncovered shed light on a tragic past that may have influenced her actions. They learned that Edith's childhood had been anything but easy, long before her marriage to Laurent. From the moment she was conceived, Edith was expected to serve others. Being the only reliable one in her family, many responsibilities fell squarely on her shoulders. Her parents' divorce only worsened her situation. Her mother became absorbed in a new relationship, leaving Edith to care for her grandfather, who had Alzheimer's disease. At just 16 years old, Edith was forced to stop attending school and forego any opportunity for education so she could look after him. By the time she was 16, Edith had no social life, no friends, and hardly ever left the house. It was during one of her rare excursions outside that she met Laurent. At 17, despite their 10-year age gap, Edith found him charming, attentive, and understanding. She almost saw him as a savior, someone who would rescue her from the suffocating life she had known. 4 months after meeting, the two were expecting their first child and living what seemed to be the perfect life, a life that, in retrospect, might have masked the deeper issues beneath the surface. To Edith, it was a dream come true, and she had finally found peace in her life, with Laurent. But this wouldn't last long, as her grandfather was moved into a specialized facility, and within days, Laurent's behavior seemingly changed overnight. Without her grandfather present, Laurent moved in and refused to leave. Then, he began treating Edith like his maid and started to act aggressively toward her when she didn't do as he pleased. Not only that, but he'd also be mad if she didn't do everything perfectly the way he wanted either. Whenever he watched TV, he would also demand Edith to go upstairs to make sure the children remained completely quiet. Laurent also owned a hunting rifle, and once pushed it against Edith's temple and said he would never let her go. Sometimes at night, he would take the rifle with him to drive around the city completely intoxicated and then call Edith to pick him up because he had gotten lost. She also went to say Laurent also tried his hardest to stop me from having any friends. It got to the point where he forbade her from even having a social media presence of any kind, and she had to call her coworkers in secret. The true depths of Laurent's horrific behavior became known when it came to pleasure. Laurent was a very active man, and often woke Edith up to demand she have intimate moment with him. He would get furious if she tried to say no, and even when she did comply, he'd still be mad if he wasn't satisfied enough, and constantly belittled her with insults. One time as punishment, Edith was meant to sleep half nude in the garden through the cold night. Perhaps his most unforgivable act was how he responded when Edith confided in him about a very traumatic incident from her childhood. When Edith was 12 years old, she went to the shower at a campground she was staying at. She was alone, and that was when an opportunistic predator struck and exploited her. At the time, Edith didn't tell anyone because she was worried it would ruin her appearance and the family name. She kept that secret for years, and Laurent was the only person she told, back when their relationship was just beginning and before he revealed his true colors. One of the many acts of abuse that Laurent perpetrated against Edith was forcing her to reenact the scene. Then, one evening while they were arguing, Laurent decided he would tell his family about this dark chapter of Edith's past that she wanted to keep secret, just as another means of punishing her for standing up to him. The only reason Edith stayed and endured the constant torment was because of the children. One night, in January 2014, Edith refused to have sex with him, and in response, Laurent grabbed his rifle and without warning, fired a shot into the mattress, just 5 centimeters from Edith's head. She was curled in a fetal position beside the bed, frozen in fear. That single shot didn't hit her physically, but it tore through every remaining thread of security she had left. Traumatized, Edith fled the house that night with her children and took refuge at her father's home. For weeks, she tried to gather the strength to rebuild a life away from the man who had terrorized her. During that time, Laurent flooded her with apologies. He claimed he was remorseful and promised things would change. Edith was hesitant, but her children, still young and full of hope, missed having a father figure. They wanted to believe he could be better. So, despite her instincts, Edith returned home. But the abuse resumed almost immediately. To the police, the situation came as a complete surprise. There had been no previous reports. No neighbors had called. No friends had intervened. It was as if the violence had existed in a vacuum, silent and hidden. When authorities questioned the couple's 3 children, ranging in age from 7 to 9, the truth began to surface. One child said, "Daddy made Mommy cry when they argued. They'd go into the garage, and we'd go upstairs to our room. They argued a lot. Sometimes Daddy hit Mommy, and she cried." Another quietly added, "I saw him hit Mommy once in the kitchen, and another time behind a car." But what struck investigators most was what the children said next. "The last time we saw Daddy, he was lying on the couch. We thought he just fell asleep watching a movie." Now, under questioning, the children looked confused, unsure if their father had truly been asleep, or something much worse. On the morning of November 20th, police officers arrived in droves at the residence of Edith Laurent, armed with a warrant to search the premises. The moment they stepped through the front door, they were overwhelmed by a rancid, suffocating stench that seemed to cling to every corner of the house. It was a smell that instantly unsettled them, coating the air with a sense of unease. The investigators began their sweep, moving methodically from room to room. They searched the bedrooms, the kitchen, the living areas, and even the garage, but found nothing immediately incriminating. Upstairs, the attic appeared to be undergoing some sort of renovation. Tools lay scattered, drywall was incomplete, and insulation poked out of crevices like forgotten stuffing. Despite the chaos of the investigation, Edith sat calmly in the living room, folding laundry with an eerie composure. It was as if the police weren't tearing through her home, looking for her missing husband. The officers took note of her unsettling detachment, how she kept folding one article of clothing after another, seemingly unaffected. Then, without warning, Edith stopped what she was doing. She looked up at the officers and said flatly, "There's something I need to show you." With that, she led them upstairs. Once there, she found a spot to sit and quietly lowered herself onto it. Her demeanor shifted, her face contorted, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. In a broken voice, she confessed, "I'm a monster. I killed him. I pulled the trigger. He's dead." As she said, "pulled the trigger," she mimicked the motion with her fingers, pointing to her own temple. Then, she looked up at the officers and told them that Laurent's body was hidden in the attic. Though skeptical, as they'd already combed through the attic earlier, the police followed her back in. Edith directed their attention to a narrow, concrete ledge that ran along one side of the attic wall. She pointed at it and said simply, "He's in there." The space she indicated was so cramped, the officers initially assumed that if a body was inside, it must have been dismembered to fit. They called in the fire department. Firefighters arrived and began carefully chipping away at the concrete structure. After removing several chunks, they uncovered a horrific sight, a human corpse wrapped in layers of black trash bags and sealed tightly with moving tape. Though partially decomposed, the remains were preserved well enough for the medical examiner to determine the cause of death: a single gunshot wound to the head. Now certain a murder had occurred, authorities launched a full forensic sweep of the home. Blood traces were found in several key areas: the kitchen floor, the living room sofa, and in the garage. When questioned, Edith recounted the night of August 5th. She said Laurent had come home drunk and slumped onto the couch to watch TV. Hours later, around 3 a.m. on August 6th, he stormed upstairs and woke her. He had grabbed the rifle they kept on top of the bedroom wardrobe and began threatening her with it. At one point, to frighten her further, he told her he'd go after her mini-self, a cruel reference to their daughter, who bore a striking resemblance to Edith. He started toward the bedroom, but Edith managed to draw him away, coaxing him back down the stairs. She followed closely behind, her heart racing. Once in the living room, Laurent shoved her to the ground with force and then collapsed onto the sofa, still gripping the rifle tightly in his hands. What happened next was chilling. With the weapon pressed against his own temple, Laurent began taunting her, his voice laced with cruel sarcasm and rage. "Go ahead," he sneered. "If you've got the guts, do it." He dared his wife to pull the trigger, egging her on with a warped sense of control. Edith, desperate to de-escalate the situation, lunged toward him, not to harm him, but to wrestle the weapon from his hands. In the struggle, the rifle suddenly discharged. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the house like a thunderclap. Startled and terrified, Edith immediately let go and bolted for the bathroom. Her mind was blank with fear. She didn't even know if Laurent had been hit. She just knew the gun had gone off. She locked herself in the bathroom and curled up on the cold tile floor, trembling. Hours passed. She remained frozen, unable to process what had just happened. When she finally emerged, the house was silent. Calling out Laurent's name yielded no response. She crept downstairs, and that's when she saw him, slumped, lifeless on the sofa, the television still playing in the background. Horror settled into her bones as the truth hit her. Laurent was dead. Panicked, she covered his body with a blanket. The children would be waking soon. She couldn't let them see this. Thinking fast, she woke them up, helped them get dressed, and told them their father was still asleep on the couch. That's what they would later tell the police, because that's all they knew. Once the children were off to school, Edith returned to the living room. Alone with the body, she somehow managed to drag Laurent into the garage and left him there, shutting the door behind her. For hours she paced. She cried. She tried to think of what to do next. The reality of what had happened kept colliding with the fear of what might come. Eventually, a grim plan formed in her mind. She wrapped Laurent's body in trash bags and sealed them with layers of moving tape. Then, using tools from the attic, she prepared a makeshift burial chamber beneath the concrete ledge. It would take her hours, but by the end, his body was sealed inside a tomb of cement, hidden in plain sight. But Edith's story didn't begin with that night. It had been a tragic one long before she ever met Laurent. The marriage, once filled with hope, had long since rotted into a cycle of control, fear, and abuse. When the truth finally came out, the case divided the public. Many saw Edith as a victim, a woman pushed to the brink, acting out of desperation and trauma. But Laurent's family saw it differently. To them, justice hadn't been served. They pushed the case into court, demanding accountability. During the trial, Edith testified about the abuse, the threats, the years of fear that led to that fateful night. Ultimately, she was convicted not of murder, but of manslaughter. The court acknowledged the circumstances and issued a reduced sentence. To Laurent's relatives, that sentence was an insult, an injustice. But to Edith, it was the closing of a harrowing chapter in a life that had already known too much pain. On May 17th, 5 years after the original trial, the court delivered a dramatically different verdict. Unlike the previous ruling, this time they convicted Edith not of manslaughter, but of second-degree murder, sentencing her to 10 years in prison. As the verdict was read aloud in the courtroom, Edith remained stoic. She showed no visible emotion as she was led away in handcuffs. For Laurent's family, the new sentence brought a long-awaited sense of closure. Though the court had merely determined that the gunshot had been intentionally fired, to them it was about more than just the legal classification. It was about restoring their brother's name. Laurent's brother, standing outside the courthouse, told reporters, "At least this proves that everything that was said about my brother was false." She wanted to make herself out to be the victim, when, in fact, the victim isn't here. Edith served her sentence quietly, without incident. Her good behavior and time already served were taken into account, and she was granted parole in mid-September of 2021. Upon her release, she returned to her family, determined to live a quiet life, far from the glare of the media. Her children, now young adults, had grown up in the shadow of a story that changed their lives forever. Perhaps shaped by their mother's ordeal, 2 of them expressed aspirations rooted in empathy and justice. One hoped to become a psychiatrist, the other a police officer. They wanted, they said, to help people before it was too late, and to prevent any other mother from experiencing what theirs had endured. Today, Edith's oldest son would be 20 years old, her youngest, 18. The headlines have faded, but the impact of those years still lingers, in silence, in resilience, and in the choices of a family that endured the unimaginable.